Good morning and good year. Hope everybody had a very invigorating and renewing Rosh Hashanah. So we start the new year, continuing the Hemshech Ayin Beis, reviewing the conclusion, informed by context of the Maimorim upon which Ayin Beis is based on, namely, especially the Maimor Mika Hashem Elokeinu Amagvir L'Shavas from the Alter Rebbe and Torah, and its biur, its explanation, and the Mittler Rebbe's 70-plus page Maimer on that, elaborating on it, plus some other Maimorim out of the basis of, especially the context of the content of Hariyah, eyesight and vision, the Maimer Beinenu Me'ires, Keshemesh U'Kireach, again from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe. So we are now up to we are on page 1403. We at the end of the paragraph on 1403. The last thing, what we're in the middle of learning is now entering into a very, every part of Ayin Beis is critical, but this is a very important juncture where he connects and goes back to Torah and the Shamas. Because remember, those are the two big so-called players. In order to achieve the purpose of creation, it's about human beings, namely souls, coming down to this world and transforming a material world into a home for God. But that's not an easy process because this material world is called Tachtenim, meaning, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, chapter 36, that is the darkest of worlds, the lowest of all worlds, Tachten Shein Tachten Matim Menu, in the context of Revelation, meaning it's the darkest world where we don't have the divine awareness as we see practically. We see it's a challenge, it's an uphill battle. Each one of us struggles with our animal soul and all the distractions of this concealed and dark world. And collectively, it's a tremendous challenge over the years, and that's exactly why we don't have Mashiach yet. Mashiach will be a time and the Geula when that battle will be over and we will have transformed the world. So we're maybe on the verge of it. Not maybe, we're told we're on the verge, on the threshold, but not quite there. So whenever you look at, you see wars, conflicts, whether it's on an individual level, on a communal level, or on a global level, it's all a result of a tachtonim. So we see it's not an easy process. And yet we are armed with this mission and armed with an arsenal, in addition to the Neshama's own power of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the Neshama.
Rabbi, your image is frozen. I can hear you fine, but your image is frozen and it's lagging for other people.
So the audio is good, the video is not?
Correct. And for whatever reason, your video just did come back fine for me. So it's
It did come back or did not?
Well, it's back. It's low bandwidth, but it's back.
Okay, let's continue. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
Let's continue and see how it goes. This is with a new modem, so I don't know what the problem is now.
It's clear now. It's fine now. I don't know. You must have pushed some wires or something, but
okay, good. So we're armed. The Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, which itself is the flame of God within the soul, or sometimes we refer to the soul as Tselem Elokim, created in divine image, or Vayipach Bapa Nishmas Chaim Chelik Elikam Mamish. Different expressions here. He uses primarily Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, armed together with Ner Mitzvah and Torah. There, the neshama has the power to achieve the purpose of creation. So a big part of what we've been discussing, especially page 1350, is when the Rebbe Rashab changed tracks from the interface of a neshama through tefillah, primarily through tefillah, through its work from the bottom up, meaning from the darkness to the light, from what he called from yesh to ayin. There was mamata l'mayla, the interface. Arimimcha l'kai hamelech, elevating a l'kai hamelech, arimimcha to keser, and to the higher transcendent levels. Then there's the interface mamayla l'mata. Page 1350, he started mamayla l'mata. That's Torah. That is Amshacha from the ayin to the yesh. Those were the exact words he used. It said ayin li yesh. Mamayla l'mata. And Torah er. That's why Torah is called Torah er, the Torah of light. As we've been learning, it illuminates, it guides. Torah semes provides us the true path to discern and determine what's the right way to behave, what's not the right way, as we learn. In Torah itself, we learn Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, all part of the process of Torah illuminating our lives. Yes, there's a difference between Mikra and Talmud and Mishnah and Talmud. Each one, Mikra, Mishnah are more Mamayla Lamata, and Talmud in Torah itself is Mamat Lamayla because it's the sages, Talmudic sages, struggling from the bottom up, so to speak, to understand Torah, but it's all within to understand the Mishnah and the Mikra, but it's all within Torah. And that has been a big part of the conversation. Now, in this itself, the Rebbe Rashab, of course, introduced, to understand this, he said, let's talk about Er Hariyah. Er Hariyah is a Er Makabel on one hand, because the eye cannot see in the dark on its own. It needs the siyua of an outside light. And what that is in Avodah, in Ruchnius, is the Eine Ha'eda, the leaders and guides that guide us with Torah Er, as we learned. So that is Er Makabel. But the etzem koyach hariyah is not an er makabel. However, we don't have access to that right now because that's more the core faculty, and there's no limit. However, as we shall learn, as we refine ourselves, and the neshama gets more and more emboldened, if you wish, or empowered, or to reveal its hidden faculties that are hidden when it comes down below, Torah reveals it, and mitzvah as well, but especially Torah, that er atzmi, so that will in turn ignite within the neshama its tremendous power that reaches even higher than Torah, as we shall soon be learning, actually starting now the next paragraph. How neshamas are now going to elevate even higher than Torah, and that is accessing the etzem koyach hariyah. As we shall also learn, some of what I'm saying is taken from the other Maimorim. Some of it is says explicitly in Ayin Beis. I'm combining it all to put it into one, as we said, piecing it all together as one bigger picture. Okay. So with that said, the actual last piece we learned was the process of Hamshacha from Chachmei Lo to Chachmei Tata, which is exactly what the Ein Ha'eda do, like he's the concept of they were misaken, established the blessings. A bracha is being mamshich from Alma Diskasi to Alma Disgali, from the hidden from the concealed and the hidden to the revealed, what he calls the Hamshach from Chachmei La to Chachmei Tata, and that's all through Torah. That was what we learned on page 1402 and top of 1403, through Torah. Explained it in two different ways. One, Torah in Ishtalshlus, Chabad of Zah, which is a mamutza, an interface between Chachmei La and Chachmei Tata, and Torah higher than Ishtalshlus. The root of Torah, that is rooted in Chachma Geduma, in the highest levels, and that gives the power to bridge these two realities, Chachmei La, Chachmei Tata, which is, and to bring it down below. So neshamas on their own, he explained briefly so far, are in a state of concealment down below when they come into a body, even though they have the Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. Torah is a state of gilui, because Torah does not, even though the Torah does go through the gradations of Ishtalshus, but it always retains its Torah element. Torah remains a divine entity in the purest form of the word. That's why when a person walks into a room, you don't stand up from him, even though he has a neshama chelik elikam and mal mamish. What is Torah? Within him. Because Torah is a revealed divine entity, revealed relatively speaking, obviously, and Torah is a revealer. So therefore, Torah serves this purpose of illuminating the neshamas, like siyua, like the outside light that allows the eye to see in the dark. So Torah is the mamutza, and that's when we say, that's why the Everest said that he made a condition. We learned that the Everest made a condition when he created the world, that dafke, if the Jews will be Mekayim Torah, then the world will stand. Why? Because the kavanah primis of creation of the world is all nimshach through Torah. That tells you clearly that the neshamas need Torah. Even those the neshamas that are performing Torah and actualizing and learning Torah and actualizing it and fulfilling it, but you need the Torah. The Torah is that illuminating guideline, guiding light, like the blueprint that God gave us by which to live. That's what we call Torah, chayenu v'erech yameinu, our life and our sustenance. Then, to explain it, he actually used a Rosh Hashanah example that Psuke Malchus, that though neshamas, of course, are the ones that crown God as king, because they themselves are b'nei malachim, and the kingship here, we're crowning God not just as king over servants, but a king over kings, meaning esnasus atzmus, reaching the highest levels in atzmus, to want to have a relationship and serve as a king over the world and over existence. At the same time, they need Torah for it. That's why they say the Psukim Malchus, Tafke Psukim from Tanakh. So even though they have that power to Melucha, they need, Makom Mokim, he says, they need to have Shochi Adeh Torah. Because Torah and Arais are one, and that is the level of Eir, so the Hamshach always goes through Torah. So even though the neshamas are rooted in Chachmei law, like we say in Tanya, they're called Banim Atem, they're the children of God, that's rooted in Chachmeh, yet it's still Chachmeh as it comes down into Zah, like he says, the 12 tribes is connected to the Yud Beis Gvuli Alachsen of Zah. Chachmei Eda is Meichin of Zah, and yet they all still need Torah, because Torah draws from the root. Not just Chachma Meichin of Zah, which we learn earlier about the Skenim, but you want to have it from Moshe and all the way from the levels of Torah and its root, and Chachma Stima, and even higher, Amen, rooted all the way in Atzmus. And that's what he concludes. The Ein Ha'eda are like the eyes that guide the entire body. So they guide through Torah, and by their guiding light, that's how Yisrael follow the guidelines of Torah, and that's like the Eir Hariyah, the eye itself sees, it's rooted in Chachma. However, it needs the siyua, the Torah dafka. It needs the siyua of a light outside of it, which is the siyua of Torah. So, bottom line that we need to keep in mind here is that Torah is an illuminating light. And that's what gives the power to the neshamas to really fulfill their mission in this world. So in a way, if you round it out, it's not exactly, because this relates more to Mamat L'mayla, but the bottom line is, like when we say the difference between the Yesh and Ur, that the Yesh HaNivra was created dafka from Atzmus. The Tziyusim Atzmuse. However, it's not a revealing entity, the Yesh. Yesh is a concealed state. That's why it's a yesh. So the fact that the yesh does not feel its source is a ma'ila, because it's coming from a place that doesn't have a source, which is asmos. On the other hand, it's not revealed. Oir is a revealer. Its purpose is to express, is to reveal. And as we learned at length earlier, revelation is critical. That's why Yitzhira plays such a big role. Even in context of Talmud, Mishnah has a revealed element. Revelation, we ultimately want the revelation of godliness, not just the etzem, but the etzem begilui. So Torah is the key element of real gilui, and it's not just regular gilui, it's a gilui atzmi, because Torah is rooted in the highest levels. Now, if you may recall, a few classes back, I read from Torah from the Alter Rebbe, where he explains that. After he explains Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom and Ner Mitzvah, he goes back and says, and Torah is an and he later explains that it's an that comes from before the Tzimtzum. Talum is Chachma, and it's Megala, all the concealed levels, even higher than mitzvah. In the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, we learned at length that there's two levels of There's the that comes after the Choshech, a that's subject to Tzimtzum, and there's a that's not subject to Tzimtzum. Torah comes from the higher level of And then he spoke about the difference between Chachma Elah and Chachma Tata, as in Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebalpeh, the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. Mika Hashem Elokeinu, same idea that the Torah Shebiksav is Yashar, so it's a high level, but there's something in Cheza that comes from Torah Shebalpeh, because it's a light that pierces the darkness, and that reaches even a higher level than the Torah of Yashar, of Torah Shebiksav. So when you take all that, plus what we're learning here, it all comes together as being that Torah has a tremendous power in revealing the divine. Obviously, it's empowering the neshamas to do so. So initially, it begins with the neshamas requiring Torah to illuminate, just like eyes need an outside light to show the way, to give them the ability to see in a dark world. But now he's going to start talking about what happens afterwards. Because the fact of the matter is, we're going to find that the neshamas and the chachamim have a power that's even greater than Torah. This goes back to that. The neshamas are rooted even higher than Torah, and it's going to reconcile these two elements. Because right now we're learning Torah is definitely clearly has a power that it illuminates and empowers the neshamas. But now we're going to learn how the neshamas give something back in return. And this is going to be the combination of how the interaction, I should say, between how neshamas and Torah work. That's the next section that we're going to be learning now. For a while, before he gets back to Eir Hariyah, and applies it all to how vision works. But the context is pretty clear, that the eye needs a light right now to see, but the eye, once it's able to access the core etzem koyach hariyah, it won't need any light, because it itself has light. And even higher than that, as we shall also learn about that as we go further. So,
how come Torah, when it's coming down?
With that said, what?
How come Torah, when it's coming down, it's not being diminished, and a neshama that comes down is being diminished?
That's the way God wanted it, because the neshamas come down to engage with the world. Torah is a tool to help the neshamas illuminate. If the Torah got diminished, what would be it would be the same problem. We wouldn't have something that guides us. So the Torah is meant to be exactly that. Torah is meant Eina Makablim Tuma. We learned also in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, Balkeri is allowed to learn Torah. Torah is meant to retain its so-called Kedusha Satera, precisely for this reason, because it's coming from the level of Oyer, whereas the Neshamas is like Elikus Nasa Yesh, is the expression at times. So that's very much the intention, that Torah should retain. It's like asking why Atzilus is Elikus and Asiya is not. That's exactly what it's made for. Atzilus's role is to reveal Elikus. Asiya's role is to bring the Elikus into a world where it's concealed.
Even though the Torah Lamato is not the same like Lamailo. What
As
makes
I
it the
just
same?
said, Nasa v'yarda, but it still retains, as it comes down below. Listen, what was life like? We learned in Ayin Beis, Volume 1, before Matan Torah. Matan Torah is a big event, right, in Jewish history. In all of history. Why? Because of Torah. The Neshamas were there before Matan Torah. The Neshamas stood at Har Sinai. So the Neshamas were there. But the concept of Torah coming down and being given to the people, Chem de Gnuza, now in a way that it can transform the chefs of this world into Kedusha, that's a thing that happened by Matan Torah Dafka. So Torah is it's its own power. It's the power of Torah. When we say Beresh is B'Shvil Yisrael, B'Shvil HaTorah, we don't just say B'Shvil Yisrael. You see both of them. Is it still unstable, by the way? Because I am getting a message here. Or it's all clear for you guys?
I mean, there was no picture for me for a little while, but now it looks like it's coming through.
By me, it's frozen sometimes. Your picture freezes, then it returns back, then it freezes again.
Okay.
Sound is good.
We'll try to get to the bottom of it. Okay. Are there any other questions before we continue here? As you can see, I didn't mention Ner Mitzvah here because I didn't want to confuse matters, but Ner Mitzvah plays an important role as well. We'll talk about that later because the Ner Mitzvah is a combination of a Maila Lamata, Mamat Lamaila, and in the Maimer Torah and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer discuss it, as well as later in Ayin Beis and earlier in Ayin Beis. So, but just suffice it to say that mitzvahs empower the neshama to transform the material world and the nefesh habamis, the animal soul, and mitzvahs. Ikar Torah is, like you said, eichzim b'mitzvahs. The Torah does it through mitzvahs, but the Torah here is really the highest level of oyer is in Torah. Mitzvah is still called a ner. So we'll talk about that more, the difference, why mitzvah is only a candle and Torah is a air. In Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, he discussed it at length, if you recall. But I'll bring it back together when we get there. Right here, he's talking about Torah, so let's just continue with Torah and we'll get to the mitzvahs later. Okay. Now here comes the next paragraph. Page 1403, Aleph Tav Gimel. If you want to follow the text inside, it's all scanned at ayinbeis.com. Omnom, says the Rebbe Rashab. However, here's Matzinu, we find, sheyesh koyach b'chachamim, that the chachamim, the sages, have the power, lasa is gam shaleka fiater. They can pass a law or an edict, not the way it says in Torah, which seems to contradict what we just learned. We just said the Eineha Eda, the guiding light of the leaders of the people, is because it's through Torah. They look into Torah, they know how to interpret Torah, basically what a Rav does, what Sanhedrin does, what Moshe Rabbeinu does. They teach us, they look into the Torah, they study it, and they apply Torah, guides them to guide us. Now he's saying the Chachamim have the power to do something shaleika fiat Torah, not according to what it says in Torah. Ukamoi, example, the Kiddush HaChedesh. So the mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon, which we know is in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, B'katzon al pi hariyah. So what they do, they sent witnesses out to see, and the witness had to come and bear testimony that we saw the birthing of the moon. And once the Bezdin corroborated that, they designated that Rosh Chodesh is on this and this day. They could designate a day later, a day earlier. It's up to them. And that will in turn determine when is Rosh Hashanah, and when is Yom Kippur, and when is Sukkot, and when is Pesach, and all the other Yom Tov. Diksiv Eile Moed Hashem Asher Tikra Esam. So these are the pasuk. How do we know this? That they have the power to do, because it says Eile Moed Hashem. These are the holidays that God designated. But Asher Tikra Esam, who will announce it? Who determines? So Esam, Atem Ksiv, Afilu Mutoyin, Afilu Shegin, Afilu Mezidin. So the Gemara says Tikra Esam. It doesn't say the Eibishter designates. It's God's holidays. So when it comes to Shabbos, the expression is Mekacha v'Kaima. Shabbos is determined simply by the seventh day of the week. It has nothing to do with any human being, with Bezdin, with anyone. 7 days, 7 sunsets, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, Shabbos. Yom Tov, it says this additional Tikra Esam. So the Gemara learns from that is determined based on Bezdin. Bezdin determines Tikru. And the Gemara says even if they made a mistake. In other words, let's say hypothetically the witnesses came, the Bezdin designated today's Rosh Chodesh. An astronomer comes a week later or a day later and says, no, according to our calculations, it's a day later, day earlier, whatever. So even if they made a mistake, and further, Shegigim, Betoin is a mistake. Shegin means an inadvertent error. Afilu mezidin, even if they deliberately, they knew that according to the cheshbon it would be different, you still go by bezdin. That's what the pasuk tells us, which seems to upset the whole picture here. Torah is a Torah Hashem. Shouldn't Torah tell us what to do? And here you see the Chachamim have power to override Torah itself, or to determine when the uksiv, another raya, another proof he's bringing, where it says you have to follow the Chachamim. Leisasur min hadavar asheyagidu lecha yeminu smeil. So the pasuk says, is talking about the power of the sages, of the Rabbon, of Arav, of Rabbonim, that you should not waver. Leisasur, from what they tell you, sheyagidu lecha yeminu smeil, right or left. What does that mean, right or left? So simply it means you should go the way they tell you, don't swerve right and don't swerve left. Says the Gemara, Afila emelachal yamin shu smeil. Because the seemingly, what is it coming to add, the pasuk? So Chazal tell us that even if they tell you that right is left, and right, they call it left, Val smeil shehu yamin. In other words, they're deliberately telling you something that's not necessarily the Metzias. You still have to listen to them. Metzias according to Torah. But I am Mashakosav and Ramban Sham. Because obviously all the commentaries ask the question, what does that mean exactly? That anyone can come and change the Torah? God forbid. So the Ramban explains it. But Klei Yoker Pirush, the Klei Yoker on the verse, he says, Shazel al derech Sham Razal halol metarin v'halol metamin. That he compares it what Razal say, that when you have, let's say, a Sanhedrin or Bezdin, some of them are metahir, some they look at a certain situation and they say this is pure, this is clean, tahir, and valolu metamin. And another group, let's say a Bezdin of 71, 35 say one thing and 36 say another. Halolu metamin. So he says, Talmud Leimer, nitnu merei echad. That even though they're saying opposites, so the question is which one's right? I'm not getting now the halachas, of course, acher rabim lahates, as we learned earlier, majority, the consensus, says the Klei Yoker that, so it says the Chazal say, they both were given merei echad. Like we learned earlier, if you recall, that when Moshe was on Har Sinai, Hashem himself told him, memtes ponim tahir, or memtes ponim tameh, memtes ponim tahir. He gave him 49 reasons, 49 ways to interpret something that this would be impure, and 49 arguments the other way. Moshe and Hashem, both are coming from Rei Echad, from one shepherd, meaning from one place. Says the Klei Yoker that's what it means. Yamin smell yamin. Because at the end of the day, they're not coming and changing, God forbid, what it says in Torah. However, they can go both directions. Because the Torah itself, Hashem told Moshe in the Torah that both are possibilities. So, but you have to listen to the Chacham. They're the ones that determine. So even though it may seem that from one group of Chacham would be Yamin, they say Shmuel, you have to listen to Shmuel if that's the majority. So bottom line is, what you're seeing here, that it's not so clearly black and white that Hashem in the Torah says things, and that's that. The Chacham have a role to play. They determine when is the Kiddush HaChet, when is the new moon, even if they make a mistake, even if deliberate. And now about Yamin and Shmuel. V'hainu, and the Rebbe Rashab explains now what this means, like I just said, the B'chol Dover, yesh kama ponim. And everything in the Torah, there are a number of facets. There are different angles. There are different ways to look at it. This is something we quoted earlier. This was on page, not where it was, but there was a number of pages back when he spoke about Torah Sheba'al Peh. He said clearly, I think it was, I might as well already point out what page it was. I believe it was on page, let's see. Amid, maybe 1377. Let me see. No, even earlier. Yeah, 1373. 1373, he brought this Maimer Chazal. So what does it mean? It means the Torah was not given chatuchin, piece, by like pieces. It was given, a whole picture was given to Moshe. On every dibur of a dibur, it says, on every word that was uttered that the Eibishter told Moshe, he said, memtes ponim tameh. Like he says, amalei memtes ponim toher. So in other words, the Torah was given with different angles, different approaches. And who determines? So the Chacham are the ones that determine, and you have to listen to them. So what do you see from this? That even if the Torah itself says something, and some Chacham interpret a certain way, other Chacham can interpret it differently.
Is that why is that why it could be written down? That Rebbe could write it down, and also because the souls are higher? Would that be the reason?
We didn't get yet to why they have the power to do so. He's just beginning the discussion. But the idea that they wrote down Torah, yes, Eis Lasis Lashem Heferu Teresecha, they determined there's a time, it's actually, those are the words, that Eis Lasis Lashem, there's a time that they designated that to save Torah, you're allowed to Heferu, you're allowed to abrogate Torah. The Torah says you're not allowed to write down the oral Torah, and the rabbis overruled that because they saw the Torah being forgotten, and they had their reasons, but there's a pasuk that is based on. So it's a similar idea.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he's going to bring that, if I recall correctly, but it definitely fits into the same category.
Mm-hmm.
How they have the power and why they have the power, we didn't learn yet.
Okay.
He's just right now beginning the topic. He's just right now establishing that you see they have this power. Let's continue. There's more to come.
Mm-hmm.
And we know we go according to the consensus, to the majority. So if it's, let's say, 35-36, a split like that in the Sanhedrin, in the court of law, the majority rules. Al derech moshel kisherev hasvoris mitzadades l'tayir toher. For example, if the majority of the svoris, of the arguments, are arguing and inclining toward to purify, so then it's pure. If the majority would say the other way, it would not be pure. Ulapomim. Mishum eis lasis lashem. Now he actually brings that pasuk. And there are times, eis lasis lashem means that for a designated time, this is like an emergency situation. You have the ability, in order las Hashem, that to do something, God's given them the ability, and it's in order to preserve. This is in order. They're not doing it for their comfort. They're not doing it, God forbid, to cut corners, but they're doing it to save Torah. Lasis Lashem, for Hashem's benefit.
That's a big chiddush.
The Rambam says in Hilchos Mamrim, by the way, that the Rebbe Rashab is not coming to Mechadash Halachas, you can imagine. Anyway, he's saying that because of Eis Lasis Lashem, even though in general, Achrei Rabim Lahatis, you follow the majority, but there are times that the Chachamim can paskin according to the minority. In Hilchos Mamrim, he brings that case. It's not so simple to do it, but there is a scenario like that. But bottom line, from all of this, the Rebbe Rashab is coming to demonstrate that it's not as straightforward as it would appear. That, you have the Chachamim, and they look into the Torah, and they follow Torah. The Torah itself was given with all kinds of different qualifications and approaches, to the point that you have two opposite arguments. You can have one person say Tomei, and one person say Torah. You actually have in the Gemara, I'll just give an example since it's coming Yom Kippur. In Brachas, Rabbi Gamliel, there's a whole famous story. And Rab Tarfon, there was a question, when would be Yom Kippur? And some Chachamim determined it was a certain day based on Kiddush HaChedesh, Yom Kippur. One of the Tanoim, I think Rab Tarfon, disagreed. and to
I
prove.
think it
And
was Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania.
really, I
Rabban
think
Gamliel was the Nasi.
okay, could be.
And he commended Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, you should
Anyway,
come.
to the point, and then they ruled according to one, but according to him, Yom Kippur, that day designated was not Yom Kippur, it was a different day. Because they ruled one way, they actually compelled him to walk on Yom Kippur, b'machle v'tamile, with a stick and his so-called backpack, to show that he's accepting the ruling of Rabbi Gamliel, the Nasi. In other words, there are instances where there is actually a real disagreement. Is today Yom Kippur or that? And this is a real shaila of Kodesh and so on. It's not so simple. We're not talking about it's optional. If it's Yom Kippur, there's certain dinim. If it's not Yom Kippur, it's a different story altogether. So you see that there were now in some cases they ruled according to the majority, but there are many different instances. The point being is that Chacham are involved in the process. That's the key thing to keep in mind. To the point that it could be Shaleka fi HaTeirah. What he means Shaleka fi HaTeirah should not be misunderstood. It's not that they can violate the Torah. It's not like they suddenly can say no more Shabbos, God forbid, no more kosher. But in Torah has given them the power to go either at times, for example, Eis Lasis Lashem, they could actually do something that the Torah said, concept of a Hirah Shah, which I think he's going to bring. That sometimes for temporary reasons, now I know this is treading on you could say very sensitive area, because then if that's the case, then what about all these rabbis today who say, you know what, based on this, we decide certain things can be done that were once forbidden. Jews can't, let's say, go to shul on Shabbos because it's too far from their home, so we allow them to drive. Why is that not in this category? So you have to understand that this is all coming from Yiras Shamayim. This is coming from people who are completely dedicated to the Torah. They weren't looking for loopholes, and they weren't looking to make it easy. And they knew when you could do this, when you can't. You can't, for example, suddenly determine that Avodah Zarah is not Avodah Zarah. There's certain things where this does not apply. There are areas, clearly, we see here from Kiddush HaChedesh and the Lois Sasur, and now he's bringing the Eis Lasis Lashem, that there are instances. I just want to make clear that reading this shouldn't suggest that means that Chacham have the power to override Torah, because that would really create a whole, somewhat we call a chaotic situation, as you can imagine. For example, today, conversion. There's halakha conversion, there's not halakha conversion. Rabbanim can commonly say that, no, we don't need halakha now, God forbid, to convert someone. I'm just giving an example where there may be an issue today, or other similar examples. But there are scenarios where clearly the Chachamim play a critical role, and it's not just that Torah is mashpia into the Chachamim. The point he wants to bring out is the Chacham are mashpia in Torah. Because that's the point. They are not that they're violating Torah. They have the power to override a particular aspect in Torah, because that itself is empowering Torah. Remember, Eis Lasis Lashem, Heferet Torah Secha, doesn't mean that we're leaving Torah. It means in order to preserve Torah, like there's an expression, Michal in Shabbos Achas Kedei Lishmer Shabbos is Harba. Pekuach Nefesh, if a person needs to be saved on Shabbos, so it says, you violate one Shabbos in order to protect many Shabbosim, because if the person dies, God forbid, they'll never keep Shabbos. So it's not in order to abrogate or violate, it's in order to preserve. So just keep that in mind. But it is the Chachamim that have this power, which is a tremendous power. We'll see how he's going to develop this, but this is the gist of it, just to make sure that we have to understand clearly what he's saying here. Is in the Rambam Hilchas Mamrim, is a whole section of what is considered a mumar, what is considered following Torah, not following Torah, all the rules of when can a bezdin overrule another bezdin. These are important questions. When there was one Sanhedrin, it's one thing. But let's say today, a bezdin in Israel rules so and so. Can a bezdin in New York override them? Or if everyone in their community? I mean, these are important questions that applied also in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. There's a lot to say on this topic. I just want to stick to the main theme here. The main thing he wants to really establish is that the Chachamim have the ability to be mashpia and Torah. Right now he's saying to override Torah, but it's in order to preserve Torah, obviously. Okay. So now he's going to explain this. Let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything. He's going to explain. The topic is not over. It's just beginning. But is it clear so far what we've learned? I believe so, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's clear. It's like you said, the Lashon is Eis Lasos Lashem. This is for Lasos Lashem. That's why they refer.
Exactly. Okay. Now keep in mind, Moshe did have, when Moshe heard from Hashem, Memtes Panim Tome, Memtes Panim Torah, he did say to Hashem, why are you making it so complicated? I mean, I'm paraphrasing. Why not just give me the rule? So Hashem said, because I want you to be a partner with me in Torah. That's the key here. Remember, interface. A partner, not that I just tell you what to do. I'll give you the methodology, the Yud Gimel Midrash Ater Nedreshes Bam, the 13 different methodologies, etc. And I will give you the arguments this way and that way. And I want you and the Chachamim down below, Torah Lei Bashamayim, to determine, because I want you to be partners with me in the development of Torah. So the foundations obviously are Min HaShamayim. And nobody can change a pasuk, obviously, as well. And nobody can change the methodologies. But the methodology of applying it based on different circumstances, that was given to the Chacham. So he says now like this, Inyanhu, the Rebbe Rashab continues. Al derech sh'amr Razal, like Al derech, like Razal say, Elu ve'elu divrei elikim chayim. So it says in a number of places, famous is by Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, where one says one is machmir and says it's something is not permitted. Other one says it's mutter is permitted. So the Gemara says elu ve'elu divrei elikim chayim. These words, they're both words of the living God. So of course the obvious question, what do you mean? They're saying opposites. They're not saying two different explanations in the same thing. So there you can say there are two explanations. They're actually paskening differently. This one says it's not allowed. This one says it is allowed. Tomei toher, like we said. So he says every opinion, we're talking about opinion according to Torah, not every opinion that any Tom, Dick, and Harry Havdil says. But any opinion that is based on the Torah methodologies that the Torah gave to us has a root and a source l'mayla. So you say that, say, Hillel was rooted in Chesed. According to Chesed, this is the way to pass, the way to rule. Shammai rooted in Gvura. This is the way. Valkain, he be'emes be'etzem. That's why that's why each opinion is fundamentally true, depending which world you're in. In other words, if you look at the world through the lens of Chesed, this is the psak, this is the ruling. Look through the lens of Gvura, this is, and both Chesed and Gvura are two attributes of God. Again, we're not talking about where things that are outside of the pale, outside of the reservation. So both are possible. And therefore, both are emes be'etzem, u'kumay Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel, like the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. The av de Beis Shammai b'mokim Beis Hillel ein a mishneh. So after the halacha ruled, there was a time where the community of Shammai followed Shammai and the community of Hillel followed Hillel. Then there came a time was designated the halacha kebeis Hillel. So even though we know that then, once it was determined, Beis Shammai mokim is ein a mishnah, meaning you don't follow Beis Shammai once the halacha is like Beis Hillel, but his opinion still stands. B'kol mokim das Beis Shammai yesh lo gam ken sheresh mokim l'mayla b'bchinas hagvura. So even though you don't rule that way, you don't follow that in action, but the theory remains a legitimate Torah theory, because it's according to Gvura, that's the approach. It's just that the ruling is not that way. But the theory is completely legitimate. And you can make a whole case for it. Keneda, as it's known. The beginning of the Hemshech, all the way talking about literally, he says, page 20, the Rebbe Rashab talks about it, why that, how that works. Because ultimately it all comes from one source, Hashem. So you say Chesed and Gvura of Atzilus, is one more emes than the other? Is Chachma more emes than Bina of Atzilus? Chachma may have more clarity. They have different roles to play. But from the point of view of a Likus, when God is in the state of Gvura of Elikim and Din, it's just as Elikim Chayim as much as when God is in the state of or expressing himself through Chesed. So it's like a person, let's say you are a parent. When you're showing kindness to your children, or sometimes you show discipline, it's not like there's a contradiction. They're both coming from you, what you feel is best for your child. In a way, you could even say that discipline also has an element of chesed in it. But I'm not even getting there. The fact is, they're just two different kavim, two different ways you express yourself. And they could be opposites. From the eye, from the outside eye, someone say, 1 second, you were just so kind. Why are you being so severe now or so disciplined? The answer is because different situations require different approaches. Sometimes a mix of both. So point being is that even after the halacha was like Beis Hillel, it still doesn't mean that the theory of Beis Shammai stands is still emes in Sheir Shemaka L'mayla, not in halacha L'mata. The halacha you follow what the Beis Hillel says. Rak shahalachi b'chinas emes la'amite. Only the halacha, the ruling, is what Chassidus calls emes la'amite. So I know it sounds weird. Is it true or is it not true? So Chassidus explains there are levels in truth. Even though generally speaking, a true is either true or it's not. But in this context, in the Likus itself, emes could be chesed and gvura, both emes. Emes lamite is saying, what is the ruling? What should we actually do in this world? So the Chassidus calls that emes lamite, the truth of truths. Meaning the psak halacha, among the two different approaches, which both are legitimate and both are emes, there's the emes lamite, u'kameshakasa b'mokamacher. Samach Vavi talks about this. Vavai imei kalacha kamesei. So elu ve'elu divrei elikim chaim. The word is elikim. Halacha you called vavaya imei. Hashem imei, vaya imei. Halacha kamesei the halacha. Halacha has a particular power because it says what is the truth in action down below. So I'll give you an example. The Medrash says that when God created the world, He asked two attributes what to do. First, He asked Midas Emes, should I create the world? And Emes said no. The world is filled with lies and deception. People will lie, people will be deceptive, duplicitous. So from the point of view of Emes, why would you create a world? That's not Emes. Then He asked Chesed. Hashem asked Chesed, should I create the world? And Chesed said, yeah. Because there'll be a lot of kindness done in this world. So the Medrash says that Hashem took emes, He threw it to the ground, meaning He didn't follow it. But it says emes me'eretz titzmach. That's why it says from the ground, emes will blossom, will grow. In other words, ultimately emes will be revealed. But right now, in order to create the world, He created with elam chesed yibana. He created the world with chesed. Now, emes was not wrong. From the point of view of truth, this world is a world of lies. It's not like it made a mistake. Emes is sort actually, no pun intended, it saw the way it was by emes. The world is filled with lies. But Hashem said there's another aspect to creation of the world. Even if I don't have complete emes, but I'll have chesed. And ultimately, when the people will work on it, they'll ultimately find emes as well. Chassidus explains what that means exactly, how they find it. But the point being is that you could have two perspectives that are very different. It all comes down through which lens you're looking. Are you looking through chesed or through gvura? So from the point of view of emes, I know I'm using the medrash of emes, so let's not confuse it. But the point is, from the point of view, both can be two true approaches. But at the end of the day, you have to paskin. In this case, Hashem paskin like chesed and created a world. Because if He wouldn't have, based on emes, He would never have created this world because it's a world of lies. So the point being is that there are different perspectives and different in emes and emes lamite. That's halacha.
He's calling it emes be'etzem und emes la'amitos.
Okay. ulapomim. So now with this he explains how is it possible the Chacham can, so to speak, override something in the Torah. It says ulapomim, and at times let's say the chashah, for the immediate need. There's a need. There's an immediate emergency. You can say immediate urgency. Yechelim leilach achas hadeis. You can follow one of these opinions because you're not following a wrong opinion. It's still emes. And certain circumstances dictate that you follow it afal pisha ein halacha kain. So it would be like following Shammai, even though generally you follow Hillel, but for whatever circumstance, certain situation, the Chacham can determine that now you're following that the day. It's like I said earlier, you're not talking about Chas v'Shalom going against Torah, period. You're just going a different opinion that was not the ruling emes lamite, but it's still emes be'etzem. So that's step number one. So the Rebbe Rashab established that Chachamim have power, so to speak, power over Torah itself to determine, based on circumstances, what should not be done case by case. But now he's going to go, the plot thickens, bottom line. It gets more. It's even stronger than this. But let me stop if anybody wants to clarify anything or any questions. Be'emes, however, now in truth, the Rebbe Rashab takes this further. Had it be a chelas habezdin, it's in the power and the capacity and authority of bezdin, of the court of law. L'shan is gam bedover hamakubel she'ein bezeh machlekas klal. To change even something that's accepted, meaning everyone agrees. We're not talking about here. You could say, okay, that for whatever reason they're following Shammai, not Hillel, or they're following the Torah, not the Tomei theory, because both are true, and whatever the circumstances dictate. But it's not complete. But now he's saying, even when there's no, there's no two different opinions. They can also change. Vafilu, and further, and even mitzvah sesa, mitzvah leisasa, mitzvah sesa b'leisasa, shebetera. Even changing a positive or negative mitzvah, Komesh Kosav Rambam. He brings the Hilchas Mamrim Peirik Beis, like the Rambam writes in Hilchas Mamrim, chapter 2, Halacha Dalad, the fourth Halacha. V'chein imro lefisha. He's saying what the power Bezdin has. So he brings different instances. He says, and also if they see lefisha for a certain period of time, we're talking about temporary. They cannot change our mitzvah forever. That's not possible. But the role of lefisha levatel mitzvah sesa, that for whatever reason, an emergency situation, an urgent situation, that they feel there's an appropriate reason to be mevatel, to abrogate, to violate a positive mitzvah. Or love it, I should say, to abrogate a positive mitzvah, or love it, or to violate al mitzvah leisasa. Kidei lahachzir rabim l'das. The Ram gives an example. For example, they see the situation is of a time of shmad. Time of shmad is when there was exodus and so on, that Jews were being forced or they were under duress and other situations that was causing them to leave Yiddishkeit. So you want to lahachzir rabim l'das for whatever reason. You want to bring back many back to the religion, to the faith. That's one scenario. Oy lahatzel rabim Yisrael, or to save many Jews. Milach koshel b'dvarim achedim, from being nichshel, from being how do you translate nichshel? From being for slipping up, basically, in other matters. So in other words, they see there's a dangerous situation, whatever the reason may be. Let's say the king of a nation has ruled that everybody has to bow down to Avodah Zarah. That's the rule. And they're being forced or they're being compelled, or whatever the reason is. So they could be nichshel in that. I'm just giving an example. So in certain scenarios like this, the Chachamim, the Bezdin has the power. He says, so the Bezdin will do what is necessary for that time period. For that situation, they can be mavatla mitzvah sesa and be over on mitzvah sesa. Obviously, only they can determine, it's case by case. It's not an opening, a loophole for people to use. Okay, here he does bring the Maimer Chazal I mentioned before.
With few exceptions, like Avodah Zarah.
Yeah, obviously there are exceptions. They cannot go. Yeah, there's many exceptions. They can't, for example, say you're allowed to go murder people. I'm not talking about self-defense. To just go be over on lei sirzach, just because that there's certain things you can't do. There's also yarig val yaver, etc. So he says, Shabbos achas, like in other words, desecrate for him, for over God, one Shabbos, Kadeshi Yishmer, Shabbos is harbe. Now Shabbos is a mitzvah sesa daraisa. It's also a mitzvah leisesa, zocher v'shomer. And yet, in order to preserve many Shabbosim, the Bezdin can rule to be mechal one Shabbos. Okay, so here comes, of course, the big question. How is this possible? How could Chachomim have a power to override Torah? Now we understand Torah gave them that power, but but the Rebbe Rashab is now going to explain. But Tzorich Leimer, this is what he says now. But Tzrichim Leimer, rather, you have to say Shezeu mepnei she'Yisrael be'emes kodmu l'Torah. You have to say, if this is possible, if Torah was preceded everything, and Torah was the highest level, then how could anyone come, even Yisrael, and override, even for a moment? So you have to say, be'emes Yisrael's kodmu l'Torah. Yisrael precedes Torah. U'kamei shekosa be'erach b'da yenasi b'dibra masli yenosi u'bahabiyurim. Like he explains that link in the Maimer of Yenosi, probably this is Yenosi of the Rebbe Marash, his father, Tofrei Shmem, and its explanations. I have to look it up because if I recall, there's no explanations on Yenosi. So it may be that Yenosi in Likutei Torah and the explanations, including the Rebbe Marash. But bottom line is giving us a clear Maramokim where this is discussed at length.
Why is he not saying if it's Likutei Torah?
Yeah, Rebbe Rashab doesn't always say. It's like sometimes Dibra Maskul. If it was just Dibra Maskul Yenosi, probably would be the Rebbe Marash's. I think it's the Likutei Torah, because Likutei Torah has two Biyurim on Yenosi. And then there's also, of course, the Rebbe Marash's long Maimer Tofrei Shmem. I'll look it up. I'll let you know. I have to look it up inside. Val Kain. And because Yisrael Kodma l'Torah, Yisrael precedes Torah, Yesh b'yecholtom, that's why they have the power, the ability, capacity, lahatir l'tzedek shah, to make something, lahatir means make something permissible, to permit it l'tzedek shah, for the need of the moment, for that moment, to the emergency situation. Esa osur al piyatera, to permit something which is prohibited according to what it says in Torah, like the Chalal of Shabbos Achas. Okay. Now he's going to go into a long explanation relatively. So what's going on here? Before we learned that the eye needs the Torah to see in the dark. And we need the Einai to guide us. Now we're learning the Shamas can go override Torah. It's all Kodmala Torah. So which is higher, Torah or Neshamas? And this is critical in the bigger theme of Ayin Beis, obviously, because we're talking about the interface between divine and existence. And we've been learning till now Torah is the illuminator. And now we're suddenly throwing in a twist here that Neshamas Yisrael have a power over Torah. He's going to explain now at length what this means. And that we're going to learn like the two levels in Riyah. There's the eye as it is in the vessel. There it needs an outside light, Torah. Then there's the eye be'etzem is higher than that light. This is what he's going to lead up to in the next section. But I think I'm going to stop here because I don't want to just start without getting into the thick of things. But let me stop if anybody has any questions. Let's start with that.
I'll wait till you go offline.
Someone asked something I wasn't able to hear.
But I'll ask the question when it stops recording on YouTube.
When I'll stop the recording, you're saying?
Unless somebody wants to ask while it's still on the air, then that's fine. I'll wait.
No. Does anyone have questions on what we learned now? Outside things we'll talk about in a moment. I'm just tying up what we're learning here.
I mean, not to jump the gun here, but when he says that neshamas come to the Torah, I think, didn't we discuss, and maybe again, if this is coming up, then you can say we'll talk about it later. But that in their most pristine, pure state, the neshamas are higher than Torah, perhaps in their source. But as they come down and they get stuck in the goof, and they end up, doing sins or what?
He's going to discuss this at length now.
Yeah. Okay.
If you read the next lines, you'll see in the next page. You'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So there are no questions. I'm going to stop here. I think it's wise to stop here. By Vahe is going to explain now. This is a Torah and Neshamas Yisrael relationship. And this is definitely setting the stage to understand Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, Ner Mitzvah and Torah, how they all interact with each other. But, as you shall see, this is going to be a while. This is going to take a long journey here. But it's well worth it because we get a good picture of the whole what I'll do is, once we explain what Torah and Neshamas, he's going to then go further into understanding how Neshamas need different support from different forces. You may recall Malachim are going to come into play. And then he's going to get back to Er Hariyah, which again is the operative, main, central, I guess, anchor that connects this whole section. And then we'll get back to Ner Mitzvah V'Tereh. So it's all pretty organized. It's just there's a lot of material. So my job here is to make sure we don't get overwhelmed by all the material and keep focused on what are the main key themes that Rebbe Rashab wants to explain. But he is explaining it with a lot of arum, as they say, a lot of surrounding material, a lot of supportive material. Okay, but we'll navigate, we'll maneuver this. So we'll stop here, 2/3 down, page 1403.